Are there any questions about the homework assignment? The get them all instead of catch them all homework assignment. No questions? Okay. No questions whatsoever? Okay, well, that's okay. If you guys have any questions, just go ahead and bring it up in class, and we can talk about those. So this particular unit talks about drawing in two-dimensional, in 2D, basically in the canvas. So when we look at the canvas, okay, what can we do inside the canvas? The canvas itself is capable of doing a lot of things, but most of the work, the heavy lifting, can be done using the sprites. Okay, so here we have sprites. And we have two different types of sprites. We have a ball sprite, which is circular in shape, always. Or you can have an image sprite where you can load any image you want into that sprite. And you can change the image on the fly as well, which is great because you can, when you look at the image sprite, what can you change in the image sprite using your blocks? Basically, all of the properties. Not just one, but all of the properties. And particularly, if you want to change how it looks like, you can change the height and the width. You can scale your sprite, so you can make it smaller, you can make it bigger, depending on what you want to do. For instance, if you want to emulate an explosion scene, okay, you can actually make the cloud a little bit bigger and bigger over time, and you can use your timer to control that. You can also control the rotation. If you want to control the rotation, it is actually controlled by what we call the heading. So the heading of your image sprite controls how you want to rotate the image sprite. Okay. You can also control the picture itself. So if you want to display an animation, you can basically use multiple pictures and use your own blocks to switch between the pictures so that it looks like some kind of animation. So you have all kinds of flexibility when it comes to controlling how your sprite would look like. But the problem with all of these things is when you want to do collision detection, it is only detecting collision based on the unrotated dimension of your sprite, which means if you have a long sprite, then after the rotation, the way it is detecting collision may not be accurate anymore. So that's the only downside of using a sprite that is kind of long in shape and not square in shape. Are there any questions about this part?
If you can use an animated GIF or GIF?
Well, let's go ahead and try it out. I think it cannot, but we can always give it a try. Okay. Okay, so we'll look for one to download. Except I don't think Google Images would actually display the animation.
Yeah, you have to follow.
Yeah, you probably have to click on them first.
Okay, so here's one, and then we look at the image. Okay, so that one is animated. We'll go ahead and download it into my downloads folder. And then go to my folder just to double check to make sure that we can see it. Just looking for a way to display that. Downloads. Okay, it's not displayed as animated. Oh, maybe it does. Yep, it's animated. You can see, but the size is not right. But it is animated. Very slowly animated. Okay, but it is animated. All right, I don't think it will work in App Inventor, but we'll give it a try. Has anyone tried? Nope. Okay. So we'll go ahead and upload this one. based on modification time. Here we go. And then we'll try here. Picture is animated GIF. Well, that's the interesting part. If I do it here, it does look animated. All right, so now let's go ahead and fire up our emulator. Browser, and we want to build the APK. Let's move this one to the other one to the other workspace. The reason why it's animated inside the previewer is because it's just using the browser's own display capability to display it. So if the browser itself can display animated GIFs, then it will look animated in here. So the question is whether the canvas is using the same mechanism to display GIFs. I'm really doubtful about that, so we'll see. It's still building the APK. Maybe the animated GIF is breaking App Inventor. Because usually it doesn't even take this long, so I think we might have a problem here. Let's just go ahead and reload. Do it one more time. I'm guessing it won't do it because it's stuck at 95% just like last time. Well, while this browser the tab is doing this, we can look up this App Inventor animated GIFs. There we go. Okay. Oh, okay, we do get the app APK, so it just took a little bit longer. And the size is a little bit bigger than the usual size because I think it had to do the conversion from the animated GIF.
Oh yeah, the GIF is 1.5 megabytes. Fairly large.
Well, it's not too big. But we just want to see whether it is going to be animated here or not. So install -r. Oops, PK. There we go. All right. All right, I think we should let people place bet on the behavior of this program. I think it's still called replay, so we'll. Nope, no animation. So too bad. It does not do animation. And that's also kind of what this one is saying. You know, one of my students has asked how to display an animated GIF, and the reason is there's no animation in his app. So the quick solution is to convert the animated GIF into MP4 and display it using the video player. But that won't get you into the canvas. That's the problem. You cannot put it into a canvas. So if we add to this one, you know, canvas, that might give us a little bit more information. All right, here's an interesting one. A crawling animation, but it's not because of the GIF. Okay, there we go, confirmation. It says GIF animations are not supported, or not yet supported. In order to display a GIF animation, you can use an image editor and take each one of the frames or layer from the GIF file and save them as separate images. These can then be imported into App Inventor's media folder and displayed one at a time with a clock timer block and an image sprite on the canvas. So there's no quick and easy way to do it. You just have to kind of do it yourself. All right, well, that settles this one. Any other questions related to Canvas and the use of sprites in App Inventor? No questions? Okay. Are there any questions about any topic in your project? Because we are over 1/2 of the semesters, and I'm hoping that you guys have been working on your final project. I know several of you have been working on your final project all along, but some of you I'm not 100% sure. So if you have any questions about how to do a certain thing in your project, this would be a good time to ask. Any questions? Yep, go ahead.
Can you make a call to an API that returns more than one value and then use that data?
Okay, when you talk about API, are you referring to a web-based API?
Yeah, like a web-based call that you make and returns, say, like, I guess JSON. Or
okay.
Returns.
Yeah, it returns a
I've done it
JSON.
with one, like I've done it where it just returns one value and then we'll use that value. But I'm just wondering, if it returns, say, like a structure,
Mm-hmm.
how would you
parse the structure?
Yeah.
Okay. Remember, I had one example, and I'm pretty. Let me see where I put it. I think I put it into the news forum. Okay. Let's see. Morning before another sample program. Maybe not here, but I remember I did one example, or there's a link to one example. Need to find out where I put it. Probably under advanced techniques. And there was a link to there we go. Example of Google API. Okay, there we go. So this one is kind of a hack. Okay, so let's go to that article and find out how they do it. So this one is kind of a hack because this part is really just about the app itself, and this is the actual query itself. So let's go ahead and put this query in the browser itself. Okay, I could have probably can just right click it, but I want to make sure that I'm only using the URL itself. And when you press the enter key, it gives you something like that. Okay, so when you have something like this, I think App Inventor can use the web components JSON decoder to actually decode it. Okay? All right, so that's the theory, but are we sure that the JSON decoder can actually decode something like this? But the first thing we want to do is to look at this whole thing and say, okay, but how is this different from the stuff that we have talked about so far? The first one is the curly brace. Okay, the curly brace is something that we haven't seen in this class in a JSON format, because the curly brace is representing an object as opposed to the square bracket, which is representing a list. Okay, and then the other part has to do with the colon representation. So let's just take this one as an example. Okay, e tag colon. I'm just going to highlight it so it's also recorded. So I'm just going to record. Just look at this one here. It's basically e tag is the key, and then UV DMRN JTKZ0 is the value of that key. In other words, when you are dealing with objects, it is automatically using the key value representation, which is not in the list. Now, if I'm not 100% sure, but I am quite sure that I have seen somewhere, I think I did it myself, that it will convert this into a key value pair list, so that everything in the end will still be represented by a list. Okay? All right.
List, sublist, or like
It'll be a list of sublist and then sublist. So it will still it'll be using the key value pair concept. So in this case, this entire thing, starting with the overall curly brace, is one list of key value pairs. This is one pair, but this will be a very simple pair. This will be represented by a list with kind as the first item, and then books, pound, volumes as the second item of that list. So this by itself is represented by a list. This one is going to be a simple list as well, only of two items. The first item is the string total items, and then the second item is the number 1251. Okay, but this one is going to be more complex because items is also a key, but the value corresponding to items is a list already. And then within that list is an object, and this object is represented by a list of key value pairs as well. So this is one item, this is one key value pair list inside this list here. This is another one inside that list, and so on. Okay, but that's a good question, okay, because I want to find out too. Okay, I want to find out whether this works or not. So what do you do when you say, okay, I have a suspicion that App Inventor knows how to read this, except it has to convert the object format into a list format. So that's the suspicion. Okay, if you want to confirm that suspicion, you write a simple program, okay, to basically check this out. All right, so let's go ahead and write a program to check this out. And this is also a good demonstration of how to use the web component. So let's go ahead and go to projects and start a new one. Okay, so we want to say test Google API, because that's what this particular program is going to do. And of all the components here, we don't need a web viewer because we are not looking at the result of the API call as a web page, okay? Because it's getting us a JSON page, which is not a very pleasant thing to look at using a web viewer. It will display it, but it's not going to be in any way that is easy to parse. So what we need in this case is go to connectivity and grab a web component instead of the web viewer component. Are there any questions about the differentiation between a web component versus a web viewer component? Yep.
Web viewer was in which category?
It's under user interface,
User interface. Okay.
which is a clue of what it does. So a web viewer is basically a miniature web browser. Okay, it would actually render an HTML document the way it's supposed to. Okay, a web component, on the other hand, is a non-displaying component. It doesn't display anything, but it does allow your blogs to go out to the internet, make an HTTP query, come back and do something with it, including, but not limited to JSON decoding the result. Okay. All right. So now that we have a web component selected here, we'll basically put in the URL, which is the same one, the very same one that I talked about a little bit earlier. And we'll say we don't need allow cookies because all we're going to do is to get that result JSON decoded and then see what is the result of the JSON decoding. Okay. Okay. So in addition to doing this, we also need a label just so that we can see the actual result of decoding that thing, and potentially maybe a button to trigger the operation. So we'll use a button here to trigger the operation. And let's go ahead and change the name of the button to say test, okay? And then in the blocks, the only thing we have to do is to go to the web component, or go to the button first because it's going to trigger the operation. And then we go to the web component and say, let's go ahead and get it, okay? And there are several blocks here. Let's go ahead and let me explain what each one is going to do. We don't need the first one because the query is already fully formed, so there's no need for us to build the request data. On the other hand, if the request data is not static and you don't have it included in the URL itself, you can actually give it a list of key value pairs so that you can format the request data in your URL request. The second one is clear cookies, because you can use a web component and it can maintain cookies. Why do we want to maintain cookies? What is the purpose of cookies in the context of web browsing?
Holds data.
Sorry?
It holds data.
It holds data from the perspective of the server, so that every time you make another query to the same server, it will send back the same cookie, which is the only way that a web server can maintain the concept of a session. Like after you sign in, you get a cookie, right? So every single time you have further communication with the server, the same cookie is being sent back to the server, and the server uses that cookie to say, okay, is this matching a ongoing active session? If it is, then whatever you do is linked to that particular session. Okay. How many people kind of understand the concept, or how many people do not kind of like, I'm not really quite sure what that means? Yep.
But I think HTML5 has another way of storing data now.
Possibly.
Has a
yeah.
session and a. I can't remember.
So HTML5 has more
Yeah,
more mechanism to maintain
You're
sessions.
right. I guess because cookies were a little more challenging than that.
And also security issue as well when you
Right,
deal
right.
with
But
cookies.
Cookies is still probably the best.
It's the most backward compatible.
Yeah.
And then we have delete here. It's deleting. It's a request to delete something remotely, which means on most servers it is not implemented. Okay, you can send a delete request and the server will just ignore that, because most of the time you don't want to be able to do that. Now get is a big one, because get is actually between get and post. I think those form the most common request to a web server. A get is basically good for something that's relatively small. Okay? So the amount of data that you're sending to the server is usually pretty small, and what the server will reply back to you is usually pretty small as well. Okay? When you have something that's huge that you want to send over to the server, then most of the time you want to use a post or post file to send something over. When you expect a huge result to come back, you also want to use a post. Okay? But in this case, get is what we want, because we have a URL that is fully formatted already, and it is in the URL itself that has all the parameters. So that's what we want. Now the question is, when the get block returns, what does it mean? Does it come back right away, or does it just send a request and it comes back right away? And then it waits for the request to actually come back.
It waits because it's an external resource.
Well, let's read the description here. Okay. So performs an HTTP GET request using the URL property and retrieves the response. So this part already suggested it does come. It won't come back until the response is there. Okay. If the saved response property is true, the response will be saved in a file, and the got file event will be triggered. In other words, if you want to save that result and you want to process it later on, or you want to go back to it at a later point, then the response is also saved in the file, and then the got file event will be triggered when the file is created and finished creating. The response file name property can be used to specify the file if you want to have a specific file name. If the save response property is false, the got text event will be triggered. Okay, so that means there's a contradiction here, because the first part says and retrieve the response. That part is not a function of this block here. This block is only sending the request. When the request or when the reply comes back, or the response comes back, it will give you a got text event. So they're once again, it is separated. Which means I cannot, it doesn't make any sense to do any further processing here. Okay, the only thing I can do here, just to make it a little bit more interesting and illustrating, is I'm going to change my label. Change the text of the label to waiting. Okay, waiting for a response. Because that's basically what is happening right after the get block. The get block is just sending the request out, and then it comes back right away. And then in this case, I'm changing the text of the label to say waiting for response. So if Google is really slow to respond to this request, I would actually be able to read waiting for response. Now on the other hand, if it's really fast, it might just flash by so quickly that we cannot see it. Is that okay? Yep, go ahead.
Where did you set the URL that you're going?
It's a property of the web component.
Oh, okay.
So when we go back to the designer and go to the web component, it only has a few properties. One is the URL.
Okay.
So I just pasted the entire URL into the URL here. Okay. And I did not turn on allow cookies because that particular URL doesn't need cookies. So I did not enable cookies.
And your file is blank, so does that make it false? So it won't save the file?
It's because save response is not checked. So it doesn't really matter how I want to name the file. If I do not name the file, then got file would actually tell me the name of the file. So it will make a new file name that is not colliding with anything else, and it will also tell me what the file name is.
And then the other response won't happen if you select the file.
I'm suspecting that is the case. So either you use the got text or you get the got file.
I see.
Yep. Okay, so getting back to the blocks, now we have a second event to deal with, because when the response does come back, I will have to go to the web component and say got text. Okay, now got text has a few things, because the first one is the URL, because you only have one got text block for a web component, regardless of how many different URLs you want to use. So from the perspective of the got text event handler, how do you know what to do with this text? Which URL generated this result? This is a response to what? That's why you have URL here, to help you differentiate and say, well, did I look for book information or did I look for music information from the previous request? Because in your app, you might use the same web component to do a whole bunch of different type of URL requests. So this will help you. Response code is 404 for not found, that sort of thing, so it's a number, okay? Response type is telling you, okay, what is the actual type of response? I think it's HTML versus CSV versus the various kind of stuff that can come back. The format is the response type, and then response content is the actual text or the actual transmission that is coming back as a response to that particular URL. So typically, when you go to a particular website, your response type is going to be HTML, and then your response content is going to be some kind of HTML document, which is useless when in context of a web component because it cannot display or render an HTML document. Is that making any sense? Okay. But it can also be JSON, can be CSV for comma-separated values and stuff like that, which can be more readily parsed by app Inventor. Okay. So just for testing purposes, we will basically just display each one so that we can see what it is. Okay. So now we'll set our label. Okay. Set label text to the following, which is going to be a pretty long join because I want to display all of these components. Okay. So we'll display all four. And we want separators between those two, so we want even more stuff. We need that many. So we'll put URL as the first one, response code, response type, and response content. And we want to use a new line in between so it's easier to differentiate, okay, which one is which one. So we have a \n, to represent a new line. Like so. Okay. So
Backslash n works in this case?
yes, I believe so. I think I've done it before. Okay, so let's go ahead and build this app and see what happens. So save app, save as APK. As long as your host environment is web connected, the AVD or the Android virtual device will also be web connected. So we can actually test this stuff using a regular emulator. There we go. This is actually a very good topic to explore because if you want your app to be web-based, in other words, it's using a bunch of web resources, and you're going through the API, what we call the API interface of these websites, this example is going to be a great tool so that you can pick out certain results from your query when you go out and go like, okay, what is the current weather at 9/5. What is the zip code here? 841, I think. And App Inventor, the server is really kind of slow this morning. This should be a really, really simple and small app. It's still taking a long time.
MIT must be doing something.
Well, I have no doubt that the server that's actually processing this is a virtual server that is living in a bigger machine, sharing resources with other servers. So some MIT grad student may be running a particle simulation thing on the same server. And told the administrator, give me all the resources. What about the other thing? What about the App Inventor little virtual server over here? Nobody uses that. Just dialed it all the way down to the bottom, right?
Do you think MIT manages their own servers still?
Probably because the school is big enough, and they probably have some kind of specialized hardware or servers that they want to manage by themselves. There we go. All right, switching back to the prompt here, we want to install test Google API. And go back to the emulator. Okay, so get up at this one. And we have TEST, test Google API. All right, so the first thing we want to see is to see whether it flashes waiting for response. Yep, it did. Okay, so now we have the actual thing. The first part here, I'm not sure whether you guys can see it or not. Let me see if I have a magnifier app here. Settings. I don't have it installed.
Accessibility, maybe?
Yeah, it's under accessibility, but I don't want to do the whole thing for the everything. We can probably enable no provider is found in your system. Error. Okay. That's okay.
It's actually not that hard to see like that for me.
I have a different way to do this. I can use a screenshot tool. So it's not really the best or the quickest way to do it, but it will do it. Okay, there we go. Image magic. That would be good too. There we go. So now I have zoom control. There we go. I know it's a little fuzzy, but bear with me. At least it's readable, right? Okay, so the first part, which is HTTPS all the way down to projection equals light, okay, it wrapped around because the URL is long. So this part here is the request. 200 is the response code. I think that's okay, right? How many people know web stuff?
I think it is,
Yeah, that's okay. And then the third one is the type of the response. So you can see that it's application/JSON, which self-identifies this is a JSON encoded result. And then the character set is UTF-8, which is basically ASCII. Okay, you know, UTF is the first page of Unicode, which is basically corresponding to just ASCII. -8 means it is only 8-bit file. If you have to deal with foreign languages, then you probably have to deal with something that is a double byte characters, and those are much more difficult to handle. And I'm not even sure App Inventor can deal with anything other than UTF-8. And then the rest of it is really just what we saw on the web browser itself. Okay, open curly brace, double quote kind, colon, and then double quotes, books, pound, volumes, and so on. That's exactly the same as what we saw earlier in Firefox, which is basically the content of the response. Is that okay? All right. So now the bigger question is, now that we have this entire string, okay, starting with the open curly brace, blah, 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 ending with the last end curly brace, what if I want to pick out a particular part of this response here? What if I just want to pick out who are the authors of this particular book, which is down here, right? The authors include Rowling, Tiffany, and Thorne. Okay? So how do I pick out those 3 authors out of this book? What do you think? You can do a text search, okay, as a string function. You can search for double quote, author, double colon, and blah, 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 but that's not structural. Okay, so you want to do a structural analysis of this entire result and go like, okay, can we use a list to look at this whole thing and then use select as a block to get to the right point of this entire structure so that we can find that. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what we can do about this one. So we get back here and say that, okay, that's good, we got that. But this time, when I get the text back, I also want to convert it into a list format. Okay, I want to see if I can JSON decode this particular thing. So now I'm going to add something to my designer because I don't want to get rid of label 1, and I better change the name of label 1 now because now I have multiple labels. So label 1 is response. Okay, this is reflecting what is actually coming back to me in terms of the app. But I'm going to add another label. So I'm going to add another label here and change the name of this label so that it is reflecting the JSON decoded result, JSON result, but it's decoded. So in the block, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the text of JSON result, set text, to the JSON decoded form of this. So we go to JSON decode, which is a block of web 1. So you go to JSON text decode and specify the text of label response, which is basically the same thing as, I take it back. It's really just the response content. So we look at the response content because we already know it's JSON, and then we say, let's go ahead and decode it and give me back whatever it is and display that as text. So are we doing okay so far as what we are doing with the response content of this particular URL? Because we know it's JSON already, because we look at the response type, it is JSON, it's JSON. So now we look at the response content and go like, hey, since web 1, or the web component has a method or a block called JSON text decode, let's go ahead and try to decode it. But I want to display as text, as the JSON result here. So we're just curious, okay, what does it look like? Yep.
So what do you think it's going to have? It's going to convert it to JSON formatting? Is that what you think it's going to have to do?
It is converting JSON into something that App Inventor itself can represent.
Okay. So you're saying it came in as JSON?
It came in as JSON. We know that because when we looked at the response type, it is saying that it is an application slash JSON. So we know it is already JSON encoded. Now the question is, well, if it's JSON encoded and then decoded using the web component, what is it going to look like? Because that's important, because that is how actually it is represented in App Inventor.
Right.
In a way that you can process. Okay, so we want to take a look at this one. So now we go back here and build the APK again. Hopefully it doesn't take nearly as long this time. Now, App Inventor is open source, so if I don't mind spending the time, I can actually download it, install it on my own virtual server in order to do this. Then it won't take nearly as long because I have control over how much resources to allocate to it. See, this time it's really fast. Apparently,
you can put the back end on your own server.
yeah. So apparently, whoever was running the particle simulation is now done with it. Particle simulation is a very interesting kind of thing because I think at the Livermore lab they have enough processing power to emulate every single molecule in the glass of water in real time.
Yeah.
So 1 second of server time is 1 second in the emulated glass of water, and they're emulating the movement of every single molecule in that glass of water. I can be wrong, but this is what I heard. And that's massive amount of processing power.
That would be interesting, but it wouldn't be exactly what the glass of water did. Isn't there a randomness to the?
Yep, there's some randomness. But once you seed the randomness into the whole thing, you can basically put a drop of dye
Yeah.
in the water, and it will basically show you the pattern of how the dye is dispersing in water.
In the molecular level, it's
Yeah.
calculated.
Yep. Which I think is kind of interesting. Okay, so let's re-upload the app. Go back to the emulator and test it again. Okay, so this time we have to scroll. Oh, it doesn't. I don't have scrolling turned on in the screen, I guess. Okay, fine. So when you display stuff that won't be contained in the screen, you want to go to screen and enable scrolling, which by default is turned off. Scrollable, turn it on. Yep, that should fix it. All right, so let's go ahead and build it again. Back to the emulator, run the app again, test. Alright, so this time it is scrollable, which is good because the response itself is really long. We're still looking at just the response itself. Now we are looking at the actual result, which I will do a screen capture on and then display the actual zoomed in version of that because that's going to be important. So we'll use the screenshot utility. Oops, wrong one. Okay, we want to go to accessories, screenshot. I click one link under that. Okay, we'll select this portion. Okay, so now we should have two displays, and we'll look at this one and just kind of. Okay, let's see if I can get rid of this tab here. Show thumbnail bar. Nope, do not. Okay, that's good. Look at the other one and do about the same thing. If you want to zoom in, do not show thumbnail bar and resize it because I want you to see a side-by-side comparison between the JSON representation, which is what you get from the website, and also the decoded version of that, which is what your program has to deal with. Okay. That is interesting. Am I missing something in the original? That is, it's missing the first two items. It may be at the bottom of it. Okay. Because this may or may not be in the same order. I'm looking for it. Okay, total item is the last one, and then with the other one, it's not. Okay, so I think it's just reordering things somehow internally, so things are not ordered the same way. Yep, total items is the second item in here, but it's the in the JSON format. Okay, what you get back immediately from the website, total items is the second item, but in the decoded version, which is over here, it turns out to be the very last item. So the ordering of the items may not match anymore. Okay. When we look at one single item, okay, so we want to focus on just one thing. Let me hide this one first. Okay, let's look at this one. So when you look at items, and you look at items here, and you look at, it changed the ordering. EPUB is, oh, it doesn't even have it here. I'm looking for something that we can actually see. Sale info, buy link is available. It changes the order. But basically what happens is each one of these becomes a list of two items. Okay, I'll just go ahead and find the one.
It doesn't change the structure, right? If a list is inside of another list, then the structure stays the same.
If it's inside, then it's still changing the ordering. Because within items is a list, and within this list there are several objects. So the first object has kind and an ID. It looks like everything is sorted. Right, because I see a whole bunch of close parentheses here, so it's closing one item, and this is the next one. So this is E tag, right? E tag is mapping to E tag over here.
Okay.
So
it kept that.
What is a key value pair in the original object format is also a key value pair as a list in the list representation.
But that should be in an items list.
Look, it's correct. This E tag, is representing this E tag here. So ID is going to be somewhere else, and then
yeah, it's right next to it. It's right after it.
Is it right next to it?
So it's sorted it, yeah, E before the I.
Yeah. So it looks like it's alphabetically sorted.
Which is fine within a list, but you still want the structure.
Right. Who contains who is still preserved.
Okay.
It is just within a list here, kind, ID, E, tag, self-link. These are now rearranged based on alphabetical ordering. So if you use the key value pair way to retrieve items, it will still work.
Okay.
But if you use positioning, then it may not work anymore because it does change the ordering of things because it wants to sort everything alphabetically.
Well, inside Inventor, as long as you're dealing with that one list, you have a way of getting key value pair, right?
Correct.
There is a method. So it doesn't really matter, I guess, that once you're dealing with that one part of the list.
Correct. But the bigger question is what happens with this list here, because this is a list with no name. It is a property of this item. And within this list, this is the first object of that list. Is that okay? So the question is, does it preserve the ordering when it is just a list? Because within an object, it is all key value pairs. So you can identify something by the key, but within a list, the position becomes important. So now the question is, under items, is this the first thing? In other words, does this thing has access info in country and so on? We don't see it here because it's only a part of it, but we can definitely see E tag. See this E tag here is corresponding to this E tag here. So we know that this whole thing, starting from here all the way to here, is most likely this particular object. You should be able to find kind somewhere. Okay, so
if we set a variable to this output, App Inventor is going to figure out the structure based on.
well, let's give it a try, shall we? Okay, so let's give it a try. I'm gonna hide this one, and let's just say that we want to find the authors of a particular book. Is that okay? Which is visible here. And we want to find out, how do we get to the list of authors? Is that okay? So we want to find the authors, and this time we are definitely testing a few things. We're testing the key value pair method because it is authors is the key, and this list is the value corresponding to that key. But we are also testing ordering of list because this whole thing is corresponding to the first item of this list here. Is that okay? So now I'm gonna create my own little cheat sheet here so that I can remember how to get there. Okay? So I can code it into my app. So we use mousepad as my little cheat sheet on the side. Okay. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to find the key items. Is that okay? Because out of the entire object, we have to find items first.
Because that's the highest level.
Because it's the highest level. And then after we find items, what do we need? We find the first item of the list, because the first item of this particular item, this is a list, and the first item is an object. Is that okay?
When you say an object, how is App Inventor going to treat an object? Is it a
App
list?
Inventor sees an object as a list of key value pairs. Okay. So the first item of the list is by itself a list of key value pairs. So in that case, I can use key find authors in this list. Then it should return the list of the 3 authors, right? Then it should find the list of 3 authors, and it should preserve the authors within that list. So I'm going to just give myself a little indication here that Rowling should be listed first, and then we got Tiffany, and then we got Thorne. Okay, there we go. Okay, so with this little cheat sheet, I can now get back into App Inventor and see if I can just extract that. Okay, so go back to App Inventor and go to blocks. I'm just gonna do all the same thing here. Okay, we probably want to keep this because just for debugging purposes, I will keep that. So in the designer, I'm gonna give myself. Let's make it even more fun. Let's do a web view over here so that we can display the 3 authors as a list viewer. And go back to blocks. And outside of this thing here, we'll start to construct the whole thing. So we'll go ahead and set a local variable. So go to variables and do a local variable. And we'll set the structure of the whole thing. So response object is the name of the local variable, and that's basically what it is. So we'll still display the whole list as one single text in that first label, and then we'll go ahead and see if we can retrieve just the 3 authors. Okay. All right. So getting back to the cheat sheet, this entire thing, the response object, is a list of key value pairs because it is an object. Is that okay? If it starts with a curly brace, it is a list of key value pairs. In App Inventor, how do we deal with a list of key value pairs? How do we look up something? There's a block for it already. If you go all the way down to the bottom, it has a lookup in pairs. So this is what we need. And the key is items. Okay, so we look up items first. So we say items. New. Nope. Okay. We have to start with a string first. And inside the string, we can say items. And I think it's case sensitive, so we have to be careful with the case. And then the list of pairs is response object. There we go. Okay, is this part okay first? Response object is the entire thing, which is basically a list of key value pairs. Now, item is one of the properties of this object, so we can look up that particular key in a list of key value pairs.
Only the highest level, right?
This is from the highest level.
Highest level.
Right. So what is coming out of this one? So what is coming out of this little notch here is the list, the value of items, which by itself is a list. Okay. Now, because this is a square bracket, it really is just a list. Okay. It is not a key value pair list. It really is just a list. So with just a list, I want to use select and say, give me the first item, which is an object. Okay. So in order to quote unquote get the first item in App Inventor, I have to use a select block. So we go to list again, but this time we use select. The list that we are selecting from is the result of the other operation, and the index is just 1 in this case because we are just extracting the first item out of that block. In other words, now the answer is now this particular object starting with the curly brace on top of kind. Is that okay? So this thing, which is the last notch that we get out of the blocks, is by itself. Okay, I don't want to display both at the same time. So this little notch here is corresponding to the curly brace on top of kind, which is a list of key value pairs. Is that okay?
Okay, now you're alternating because sometimes you're getting back an object and sometimes you're getting back a list.
I have to alternate because of this.
So that bracket means list.
And then I have to use select based on the ordering of the things inside the list. It is really just the position. Because it doesn't have keys corresponding to the items.
Okay, and then the curly bracket means
a list of pairs. Then I can use the key to locate something.
Okay, so
Okay.
you're good. I guess the terminology I know is hash and list, right?
Right. When you use curly brace as a hash,
Okay.
when you use a curly brace as an array.
But you call it kind of an object meaning it contains.
Yeah, an object is really the same thing as hash. Perl does use a hash to represent objects. So in that sense, it is actually consistent. Okay, so now that we get to this curly brace, which is a list of key value pairs, we have to say, do we want kind? No. ID? No. E-tag? No. Self-link? No. Volume info? Yes. Okay? Because what we're looking for is author. Nope, I take it back. Let's see. This open curly brace does not end anywhere on this page, as far as I can see. So we want to locate volume info first. Okay? So my cheat sheet is actually wrong because it missed that part. So I need to look at the key is volume info, right? Yep, volume info, inside which we want to locate authors. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, now, so with this cheat sheet, the next thing we need to use is the key of volume info. So switching back to App Inventor, now we go back to list and use lookup in pairs again. And this time we plug this into pairs, and then the key that we want to look for is volume info. Volume info. Is that okay? So let me put this aside and superimpose the other one. So at this point, we are now looking, this notch here, this little output of this block here, is now corresponding to the curly brace that is to the right-hand side of volume info. Now, because it's a curly brace, we know it is a list of key value pairs. And one thing that we can do with key value pairs is, once again, to use lookup in pairs. So this time, are we looking up title? Nope, we are looking up authors. Okay, so we basically say, okay, lookup in pairs again, but this time the key is authors. So we go to the list, lookup in pairs again. So whatever we looked up before is now the pairs, and then the key that we are looking for is authors. Okay, let me slide this one to the side, superimpose with this one. So now we are looking at authors, which is a list, a simple list, not key value pair. It's a simple list of the 3 authors of this book. Okay? One thing I can do with lists is I can use it to initialize a list viewer. So now I go to the list view here and say, let's go ahead and initialize its elements based on that list. So I go to set elements to this big huge mess here. Okay, it actually extends all the way here. Okay, so let's revisit what we're doing here. Response object is the list representation of the JSON thing that came back from Google. It is an object, which means it is a list of key value pairs. So we can use lookup in pairs, and the first thing we want to look up is items. Okay, so switch back here. Out of items, which is this one here, it is a simple list. We want the first object. Okay, this is the first object, and as a result, we use select list item to select the first thing. So the first thing is an object by itself, which is starting with this particular curly brace, which means it is a list of key value pairs again. And once we have a key value pair list, we have to use lookup. So this time we are looking up title, which is down here. So we are looking up, we look up volume info. Okay, volume info is here. And that's why we use this block to look up the key volume info in this list. That should give us a key value pair list, starting with title, and then the next one is author. So now we use another key value lookup in pairs, and this time we look up authors. So that in return should give us the value of authors, which is a simple list of 3 items: Rowling, Tiffany, and Thorne. Okay, shall we test it? Do you think it's gonna work?
Of course.
Maybe.
The list view, how'd you set the list view?
Sorry?
How'd you set the list view?
I am setting elements to, because when you look at the list view, when you say set elements to, okay, I'm waiting for the description to pop up. It doesn't. There we go. List of text elements to show in the list view. This will signal an error if the elements are not text strings. So it's basically using a list to initialize a list view where each item of the list becomes an item in the list view itself. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and check this out. Now this is particularly helpful if you're trying to use your app to look for weather information, sports information, like who won which game. You want to look up stock information. Last semester, somebody came up with an app to basically keep track of various stocks. If it increases or decreases, it will send out alerts and stuff like that. So if you want to interact with websites that supply information like that in a raw format using JSON, this particular sample program is going to be really helpful. Okay. So we are waiting for the APK file so that we can test it.
Also, if you work in manufacturing, lots of data is represented in XML and JSON. So being able to do this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. We're still waiting for the download to come back. I think it has a barcode scanner, right? I don't want to switch the screen right now, but I think it has a barcode scanner, which means if you somehow can scan for a barcode, you can use your app to go to Walmart, okay? You'll just scan a barcode, look up from a particular website, the UPC code, and find out what it is. You can then use that to check out the pricing and all that stuff. Did I miss something, or? Maybe when I'm in the other screen, it won't let me do any download. That's the wrong time. Okay, let's do it one more time. There we go. So we want to save file. Save. Re-upload. And here is the moment of truth. Test. Okay. And guess what? We do have JK rolling. I can't scroll this, unfortunately. I can scroll the whole thing. When we get to the list view, it has a fixed size, so I can't scroll through this. But it should have 3 items. So this problem will be fixed if I make the list view a little bit bigger. That probably will solve that problem. So we'll go ahead and make this bigger. Change the height. Yep. We'll change the height based on pixels. Let's make that 300. That's kind of big. 150. That should be enough space. So build again. This can be helpful when you need to look up. I think you can probably interact with Dropbox or even stuff like that. You can interact with the API. And once we verify this program is working, I will show you guys how to look up, how to interact with the API of different websites. So we want to go back to here, re-upload, and go back here, rerun the app, test again, and it's hard to see it. But it does show Rolling and Tiffany. The last one is still missing because it's still not big enough to show that.
Why does it put so much space in there?
I think it has to do with an internal problem, because it thinks the text size is a 20-point font, but it's really not. So I think that's a problem inside App Inventor. It's not knowing. It doesn't know what font it should be using. So if I change it to 250 pixels, which makes it a lot bigger, potentially does it allow me to change the font itself? I only have font size. Doesn't seem to have font control. Okay, but I just want to show all 3 items. That's all.
Inside that list view, you can access each piece of that list view, right?
Inside the list view, you can select which one you want to access.
By an index?
By index.
Okay.
So let's save, replace. Oh, we have to upload first. Okay, and test it again. And this time it does show all 3, Rolling, Tiffany, and Thorn. Now when you click on one, it does generate an event. Okay, so what this would do is it would generate an event. So when you go to the blocks of a list view, and you scroll all the way up to the events, it will generate a after picking event. And then the after picking event, you can look at several things about the list view. Particularly, there are two things that can tell you which one is selected. You can look at selection, which is the text of the thing that you have selected, just the text. Or you can look at selection index. In this case, it's going to be 1 because it's the first item of the entire list. So which one you want to use depends on the context. If you can potentially have items of exactly the same text, then you don't want to use a selection because they look exactly the same. You cannot differentiate which one. Then you want to use selection index. Is that okay? Now, are those three things listed in the same order as in the original JSON file? That's the next question. We have Rolling, Tiffany, and Thorn. And when we look at the actual JSON file, which is one of these guys, we have Rolling, Tiffany, and Thorn. So it does preserve the order when it's just a square bracket, which is a list. It's only when it's a curly brace, which is a list of key value pairs, then App Inventor would actually switch to alphabetically sorted order, which should not matter because you should be using lookup anyway and not depend on the actual index of the item. Is that okay? Okay, cool. And in this particular case, because the query is limiting max result to only one, that's why we only got one result. That's why in items, there's only one item. I don't know why total items is, oh, okay, because there are 1,253 items corresponding to this search, but because I limit the result to only one, so under items, there's only one. This list, starting with this square bracket, only has one single item. On the other hand, if I had specified max result equals 3, then this list, after items, would give me 3 items, up to 3 items, depending on how many items are available. But in this case, it's a lot because there are 1,253 items potential.
Where do you see that you're limited?
Huh?
Where do you see that you're limited to what?
Max results equal.
Max results.
Yep. But that part is part of the API description. What you can specify to as parameters to the search is up to the API, which in this case is Google. Right, exactly. All right, so now getting back to here, what if you want to look up stock information, right? So stock, websites, API. So we got a few. We got Bloomberg, NASDAQ, E-Trade, and so on. And with each one, it has its own API. So 96 stock API, stocks API. So now we can look up one. So let's say we are interested in NASDAQ. So when you look at NASDAQ demand data on demand API, data API portal, primary category, scope, device, specific, new, architectural style, REST, which usually it is in JSON format. So now we look up the actual description. And you have to subscribe to get it. But we can also look at the book interface from Google. So say Google Books API. And we want to look up the specification. So we want to look up either guides is good, reference is good too. So under get, it now explains what are the required parameters. But in this case, we did not even specify user ID. I'm looking at the right thing. Books, V1, user ID, bookshelf, shelf. Oh, that's only related to bookshelves. And these are in JavaScript. And this is the volume. We are looking for search actually. And the volume resource is in a JSON format. Does it look familiar to you? So that's how you basically look up, how to use a particular API. Any questions about this? It can potentially make your app really, really, well connected because now you can interact with websites and save the trouble of having to parse HTML documents, which is no fun. Is that okay so far? All right, we are almost running out of time today. So are there any other questions regarding your application that you want me to kind of look into? Because if you ask the question now, I have 2 days to look it up and give you an example of how to use it. So are there any specific things that you want to do with your app, but you're not kind of quite knowing how to do it yet, or whether it's even possible in App Inventor? Yep.
Would it be possible to have like a health bar or something? Like
Health bar?
Yeah, like some that like a bar that could like track how much like like how you can have a global variable that represents like
yeah, you can do something like that, but it may not show as the format that you want. So if you go back to App Inventor, go back to the designer, you can get a slider, okay? So a slider looks like a, just like a little slider, and we can change the width to field parent, and it becomes basically just a slider. You can change, so you can do one of two things. If you just want it to reflect, like if you're in a game and you have a health thing, you want it to reflect the current health of the character, then you want to disable the device so that people cannot interact with it, but it will still display. Then in your blocks, you can now control the thumb position. You can use your blocks to set the thumb position so that the slider, the actual thumb, will actually slide along the scale.
okay.
So that's one quick and easy way to display something graphically. So instead of showing your current health is blah blah blah, you can do it in addition to a slide bar. But the slide bar can do that already. The only thing you have to be careful about is how you specify your max value and min value, because that will determine what are the values represented by the two ends of your slider. And then once you fix that, let's say 0 to 100 for percentage, then you can set your thumb position to wherever you want it to be. If you're currently at 45% of full health, then you set your thumb position to 45. The slider should move to the 45% mark to indicate that the current health is at 45%.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Anything else? Yeah.
If you use the web viewer,
Mhm.
you put your own XML or HTML into that.
Yeah,
You don't have to go to a site.
that is correct.
Okay.
But that means your data will be static.
Right.
Right. You mean web component, not web viewer. Are you?
The one that shows up.
That's a web viewer. Yeah.
Web viewer, and you can have your own
Documents.
file that you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that's one way to arrange your help files. If you want to include any help with your app, one way to do it is to do it in HTML, and then include that whole chunk of HTML pages, as resources. Then you can actually use your own HTML document as help for your
so
app.
you load another screen that just has the HTML viewer and it loads up your help.
Right. Yep. But you can also direct it to a website if you want to be able to update the help on the fly without having to update the app itself. Any other questions? Okay. If there are no questions, Wednesday is the due date of the current homework assignment. And if you encounter anything in your final project, you go like, well, I'm not really quite sure how to do this, or whether it's possible, or how complex it is to get this done, bring those questions on Wednesday. Okay, so we're kind of converting the class into a consulting session, so that when you guys have questions, I can answer those. If you don't have questions, then I can talk about different techniques, but I'm not sure whether those will help you or not. All right. So let's get out of here to the lab if you want to work on your homework assignment or your final project. And if you have any questions about this stuff, I can answer those questions when we get to the lab. Where's my recorder?